Good morning, everyone. Richard here at Calvin Wazoo, bringing you another video, music related, but a little bit different. We're going to talk about books about music and musical artists, and hoping that we can create maybe a little thread where, you all show me the books about different musicians or about music that you really enjoy and you recommend for others to read. FYI, in the background playing is some music by Giovanni Benedetto Platti, who was a Baroque, on CD, Baroque composer, musician. From his music is primarily from the 18th century. I believe he was an oboist and also wrote some cello suites. Very nice music. I've got a couple CDs of him. And it also points out that I really haven't read any biographies about orchestral composers and people from these early periods, whether it's Beethoven or Mozart, or any of them. These are books that I would like to read. So it would be cool if some of you, if you do your own video about the 5 books that you recommend, whether they're musical biographies or just musical histories, you can either put it in the down under or, make a video. That would be, kind of cool. So the 5 books I am choosing are mostly, biographies about, people in bands, not necessarily about the entire band, but there's a couple others that I will share that I really, really enjoyed. First one I'll start off with is this one by Julian Palacios. This is Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd, Dark Glow. Really well written and well paced book, going all the way back to, the very early days of Syd Barrett's childhood and some of influences. There's going to be sources being used, including his sister and, other friends and chums that, he grew up with or went to school. And then also people who knew him during the musical scene of Cambridge and London at that time. So it's a great book that talks about and lays out the contributing factors to Syd's eventual breakdown and withdrawal from society. I didn't really know very much at all about Syd prior to reading this book, and there are some other biographies that I will read as well. I'm not saying that this is the definitive, read this and this is the only book you're going to need to read. There are a couple other highly recommended books that I'm going to be checking on. But what is interesting about this particular book is the connections that were made with the members of Pink Floyd and other artists, and the influence that Syd had on many other artists. And people, that we may not necessarily think were influenced in any way, because they were so original, in their own right. People like Jimi Hendrix. You can say that some of the musical techniques that we attribute to him, may have actually come from Syd, such as the way Syd would use like a lighter, kind of like a Zippo lighter, sliding on the strings to create certain sounds. It was interesting to read about how Sid built, so to speak, his, he would take a guitar and he would add things to it, and also built in, and I'm not an electric guitarist, so some of the hardware, I'm not all that proficient in describing, but, things that he would hook up that would be connected between the guitar and the amplifier so that he could do things to modulate, modify the sound. Also, what came out in this book for me was a newfound respect for David Gilmour. David Gilmour probably helped Sid the most, at the end, in terms of when Sid was putting out his solo work after he had been dismissed from the group. And more so than Roger Waters. And Roger Waters, they were all lifelong friends. They knew each other from their, boyhood days. And and Roger Waters helped a little bit with that, but really Gilmour helped the most in getting the records put together and produced for public consumption. So really, really good insight. That also, there's another book that was recommended, and I can't remember, that I think will provide a better explanation. But this one opens the door to the notion that Syd Barrett's breakdown is not entirely the result of his LSD use. That he was sort of predisposed against rock stardom from the beginning. And some of what he was doing was probably intentional in terms of mocking the band's sudden rock stardom. So just interesting thought. All right, another book. Obviously, I'm going to have a book recommendation regarding Frank Zappa because I'm very much a Zappa aficionado, Zappa-phile, and I've read several books about Frank. I've read, obviously, this isn't going to count as one of my 5, but, the real Frank Zappa book. And I've got, all these tabs in here for certain points. But, and that's great reading an autobiography. But, autobiographies are not the beginning and the end of understanding any historical figure. They're certainly useful. But the human memory is also one of those things where you can be rock solid certain about a past event and your connection to that event and who was there and what happened, and you can be completely wrong and be misremembering that past event. That, memory is like that because we keep telling ourselves the same stories inside our head, and pretty soon to us that becomes the reality. But an objective observation from somebody else at that time would say, no, that's not what happened at all, or no, that person was not there at all, or no, you weren't even there at all, So autobiographies are always a great place to start, but they're certainly should not be your only source. The book by Barry Miles, Zappa, A Biography, really thorough, lots of tabs I put in here for different parts. it's a good read. It's a fast read, despite, it's a fairly, hefty tome. But and it's got some great, end notes, at that not only an index for material in the pages, but also a sort of discography. And let me see here this one part I'm seeing here, the different notes, for each of the different chapters, etc. One of the cool things about this was the description of the New York days with the Mothers of Invention. And Barry describes this scene I think it was the Garrick Theater where Jimi Hendrix showed up to listen to the Mothers play, and Zappa, saw him in the audience and invited him up to play with the Mothers. And Frank just kind of left the stage and went out into the audience and watched. He had great admiration for Jimi Hendrix and Jimi Hendrix's guitar playing. I guess there was another incident too where Eric Clapton joined them on the stage to play something with them, and I think that was also at the Garrick. And the funny thing was that after Clapton left, it was like nobody in the audience knew it was Eric Clapton. He was up there playing with the Mothers of Invention until Frank said, "Oh yeah, by the way, that was Eric Clapton." So this is a good one to have. I mean, I have some other Zappa biographies, but and it's got some photos in it as well, and it follows a pretty straightforward chronological order, and obviously it confirms a great deal of what Frank said in the real Frank Zappa book, but it also provides some different perspectives that come into conflict maybe with what Frank was saying in the autobiography. I mean, I even found information from the festival at Amuji's, which in the real Frank Zappa book, Frank denies playing with Pink Floyd, mostly on the fact that he said he didn't have his own guitar or anything like that. But there's photographic and video evidence that he did play with Pink Floyd. And I have a FLAC recording on a hard drive that you can hear him playing. I think it was Astronomy Domini was a song that they were playing. Another good one that is about the genre of soul music, Sweet Soul Music by Peter Guralnick. He was a very prolific music writer, and has been in the business, for decades, and he talks about, there's a whole section of this book is talking about Stax Records and the Stax sound, and also Muscle Shoals sound, as these were the two probably biggest influences in the soul music market. And then, of course, there are portions that are not just about the Axtons, for example, or other people that, Jerry Wexler, for example, who I think was the mogul from Atlantic Records, but also about a lot of good stuff about individual players and band members and reading about Booker T and the MGs and people like Steve Cropper, who incidentally was a significant musical influence on Syd Barrett. And then stuff about Sam Cooke, about James Brown, and also about, well, here's a photo of Hank Ballard and Sid Nathan, the people who were involved with the Stax record company and putting together some of these groups like Sam and Dave, how Isaac Hayes and let's see, Isaac Hayes, and who was the other one? I can't remember. But you know, they were songwriters in Stax Records, and very famous for their contributions there, even before they started doing, you know, some solo work. So a great book about the history of soul music, and not just the people making the music, but also the behind the scenes people, for example, at Stax Records and Muscle Shoals. Peter Guralnick has written a lot of great books about music. I haven't read them, but you know, he's taken deep looks into the history of music, including, you know, book about Robert Johnson. Also, he apparently has a 2-volume biography that won a prize that is about Elvis Presley. I do want to read about Sam Cooke, because while the content in this book is pretty thorough about Sam Cooke, there's a lot more I want to read about Sam Cooke. And then a couple more here is this one, Bear, which is the life and times of Augustus Owsley Stanley III. And Owsley Stanley, of course, was not only an important influence with the Grateful Dead in terms of, you know, he came up with the whole concept of the wall of sound, because he was a recording engineer par excellence. And the only reason I ever knew about him was because of Owsley Acid. You know, that he was known as the chemist who made the best LSD, you know, in the world. The only other source of high quality and pure LSD at that time was probably Sandow's laboratories from Switzerland, which is where LSD was discovered by Albert Hofmann. But a really interesting biography in terms of not just Augustus Owsley Stanley, but also about the Grateful Dead, and some insight, you know, in terms of the Grateful Dead, and how, you know, Owsley Acid influenced their music. Amazing life. And then, you know, finishing like here's a photo, you know, about the Great Wall of Sound, which was such a big effort, you know, that, you know, it was kind of abandoned because I guess they needed like 5 semi trucks to haul all their equipment, and then it was a major chore to, you know, set it up for shows or whatever. So it was a short-lived experiment. But also, you know, it'll identify the recordings that he was involved in, actually recording and even mastering. So there's the Bear's Choice, for example, release of the Grateful Dead, which are songs, you know, that he recorded and mastered. Old and in the Way is also something that he recorded and mastered. And then he made lots of live recordings when he was the primary sound engineer for the Grateful Dead. And so many of the albums, the live albums that have been reissued, you can check. There's a list in here because not everything was recorded and mastered by him. There were others who were doing the recording, included in, for example, a lot of Dick's picks and other of the live albums that have been released. but it'll have a list of the ones that Owsley, Stanley. I always kind of used to think of him as being Stanley Owsley because it just sounded, made sense to my adolescent mind at the time. But, his last name is Stanley, so it's Owsley. He went by his middle name. Really good book. And then the last one I have is, it's another autobiography. In B.B. King's autobiography, Blues All Around Me. And again, really fascinating story, well told, that, David Ritz, the writer who took B.B. King's words, did a great job of putting everything together. And, the background, finding out that the B.B. King also, was diabetic, and, and how it had affected his family, and how his musical managers, his earlier musical managers had pretty much robbed him, and he was unaware. And so all the money that he made early in his career, he lost and had to start all over again. And I also got this sign by BB himself at a concert. I was working for a newspaper at the time, and I and another guy from the newspaper, we went in to interview him. And I went as the photographer, not the writer. It was another person who was going to, even though I was a writer, I wasn't really a photographer. But I did manage to get some photos for the article. And, he signed my book. And he was such a nice man. It was just very affable and very willing to just sit there and chat. And of course, it was his manager, whomever, that said, okay, we gotta move along here because we got a show to do, because this interview was before the show. So those are the 5 books that I recommend for reading. So the autobiography of B.B. King, Blues All Around Me. Bear, The Life and Times of Augustus Owsley Stanley III. Peter Guralnick's Sweet Soul Music. Barry Miles' Zappa, a biography. And then Syd Barrett and Pink Floyd, Dark Globe by Julian Palacios. So, if you've got some books that you would like to recommend, leave a comment in the down under. You can do that. Or, hey, we can start a thread and, make your own video. And if you do that, I hope you, put a link or shout to my video, and let's see if we can get something going. But regardless, remember to pray for the people inside your head, for they won't be there when you're dead.